Good afternoon, distinguished delegates, guests, um, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an intensive two-day discussion that we've had, and now we are at our final session, which is devoted to future trends and prospects of cooperation. And I thought I'll share the guidelines for this session because we have run out of time and because some of the delegates have to take flights at the end of the day. We will restrict the remarks from the designated speakers to between 5 and 7 minutes. We are dispensing with the question and answer session. However, all the participants and the invited delegates to the conference are invited to comment on the prospects of cooperation or future trends, their last thoughts, but confine their remarks to 2 to 3 minutes at the very maximum. And so I'll announce the order of speaking also for this session. We are going to start with Dr. Khaled Al-Hroub. He is not here, but he will be connected on Skype, and that's how we are getting him to speak first, because this session is very dense and packed. And he will be followed by yourself, ma'am. You are number 2. And number 3 is Professor Kumaraswamy. Number 4 is Dr. Pradhan. Number 5 is Dr. Reza Islami. And number 6 is Professor Anwar Alam. So we'll go in that order. But I will begin with some prefatory remarks, and these are basically trying to capture some fragments of what we heard over the last 2 days. Today we were struck by the observation that West Asia is undergoing perhaps its most challenging period ever in recent history. And there was a cross-region consensus on at least one element of the challenges faced in West Asia, that even the prospect of the eventual elimination of the Daesh leadership will not decimate its demoralized and fractured foot soldiers who might rally under some other banner. And in last evening's session in particular, we covered the aspect of de-radicalization, how important that subject is, and how the ideological aspect and the political aspect of settling this issue is as important as the military one. If we are at a dangerous point in West Asia, neither regional actors nor the international community have shown the kind of determination that is required to resolve the raging conflicts in the region. And if you take the region that is closest to West Asia, north of the Mediterranean, the European Union, you can see the abject failure of, in a sense, the common foreign and security policy reflected in their inability to deal with issues which are in their contiguity. And in fact, the opposite has happened. What has happened is that as a consequence of the kind of intervention that has come first in Iraq and then in Libya and now in Syria, EU's own internal cross-border arrangements and the free movements of peoples and the Schengen arrangements have begun to come apart. Also, what has begun to come apart is Europe's very well-known social vocation, which seems to stop at its borders, because in responding to the first rush of refugees, they had an open door policy. Now these doors are slowly not shut, but are beginning to close. And they are beginning to close, repudiating Europe's long-term commitment to accepting people fleeing for their lives or fleeing against political persecution. So how have other great powers fared? I don't want to go into it because we've had a lot of discussion on the role of Russia, the role of China. I'll invite some comments from Dr. Jin at the end of this session. And the United States has come in for particularly, I would say, unkind treatment, some justified, because almost every other speaker referred to the role of the United States in the region and the mistakes made and the kind of quandary it is in. And I remember about the United States, the general attitude in developing countries is reflected in a paper that was written by a former Environment Minister, Jairam Ramesh, who once went to a US campus and spent 6 months there as a fellow, at the end of which he wrote a paper, and that paper had an interesting title. It said, "Yankee, go home, but take me with you." Well, now a word about India. The adverse play of geopolitics in West Asia and the Gulf is compounded by the extraordinary decline in petroleum prices, and we were reminded about its implications by Professor Girijesh Pant. While it has given a degree of relief, no doubt, to some of the oil importing countries, such as most developing countries and China and India, they are adversely affected also by the declining confidence in the state of the global economy. And India and West Asia have developed an economic relationship that is now going beyond the buyer-supplier equation. Close to 7 million Indians, yesterday our Vice President spoke about it, live and work in the region, and it has become a growing market for Indian products and also a growing source of remittances and investments. And so the stability and prosperity of West Asia, and particularly the Gulf and India, are intertwined. And there were references to prime ministers and the political leadership's relative neglect of the region. Well, that's going to end. I wanted to share that in this institute, my predecessor, Dr. Arvind Gupta, vociferously campaigned for a look west policy in consonance with India's look east policy. And I'm quite sure that in the next couple of years, we are going to develop a look west policy as well. And this is reflected in the first bilateral visit that our Prime Minister made, and I am referring, there again we had references made to it in Dr. Rajamohan's presentation. This joint statement that was issued is quite extraordinary. On the issue of terrorism, where we have very close cooperation with a number of countries, beginning with the United States, this document says far more than anything that we have said together with the United States on this subject. The two heads of government and head of state on one side and head of government, our Prime Minister, said that the two nations reject extremism and any link between religion and terrorism. They both condemned efforts to use religion to justify support to sponsor terrorism against other countries. They deplored efforts to give religious or sectarian color to political issues and disputes, including in West Asia and South Asia. This was specifically named, and to use terrorism to pursue their aims. They then made a commitment formally in writing in the documents that they signed, calling upon states to reject the use of terrorism as state policy. UAE's commitment, and this is again a breakthrough for us, no Arab state has frontally come forward to say that they strongly support India's efforts in the GA to have a comprehensive convention against international terrorism. UAE has said that it will start supporting this without reservation. Enhanced cooperation on counter-terrorism operations. Actually, we had a lot of such cooperation with the UAE, including extradition of fugitives from there without going through fully the legal process, something that the Western countries might scoff at, but we had real hands-on cooperation there. And to promote then a series of other initiatives, including on defense, exchanges, participation in the maritime fleet review, joint exercises, manufacture of defense equipment in India, setting up of an infrastructure fund of up to $75 billion, and most significantly, a different type of collaboration in the energy sector. The collaboration would now encompass development of India's strategic petroleum reserves, upstream and downstream sector cooperation in both countries, and cooperation in the petroleum sector in third countries. So if that is the template, then we can be sure that in the next visit that we have, high-level visits in the region, we will have a fuller expression of what would constitute a Look West policy, and then the Institute would then be proud to have contributed to it in a significant way. And I'm repeating our determination to make institutionalize this is very firm because of our experience of 2 years ago and now this conference. This will be a biannual flagship event of the Institute. I want to end here, and I can see that Dr. Al-Hroub has been waiting patiently. So over to you, Dr. Al-Hroub. You have 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation and everything. And let me start by extending my apologies that I couldn't join you in person. Now, I was maybe over-ambitious in having my remarks, then now I am kind of squeezed in 7 minutes, but I'll try to do my best. Now, building on the introductory remarks that you have kindly furnished, I think mine are somehow fitting in understanding and the analysis of the security threats, let's say, and the future scenarios of West Asia from one single perspective. That is, we need, in fact, to deal with the root causes of problems and security threats and the strategic impasses. Otherwise, we stay on the strategy or the tactical firefighting. Wherever we have a crisis, wherever we have a rising problem, then we just jump there and we try to deal with the symptom. So terrorism in the region and even elsewhere culminated nowadays by the phenomenon of ISIS, in my humble view, is just a symptom. So we have to go beyond this and we have to address the root causes of all problems. And if we think of ISIS nowadays, in my, again, humble analysis, this goes back to the American invasion 2003, where this kind of a huge opening in the region was offered, inviting all radical elements and extreme elements, maybe globally from Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Arab countries, and elsewhere. So it was kind of a God-given, if you like, territory for these radical elements. Now, within this kind of perspective and context, I want to introduce the dangers of neglecting and ignoring the Palestine issue. And unfortunately, and with all due respect to our friends and organizers of the conference, they provide in the program, in the structure of the program, in fact, yet another evidence of this dangerous ignorance. That is, not a single panel is not only dedicated for Palestine, but also not a single, maybe even a speaker on the main panels somehow discussing the Arab-Israeli conflict and its kind of consequences and dangers, explicit and implicit. Now, I am trying kind of somehow to, not to reinvent the wheel, but to remind maybe the audience and ourselves of the significance and importance of the Palestinian issue. And we should bring back this issue to regional and even international agenda. And again, this is something that I teach, which is Arab ideologies in the region since the turn of the 20th century. In this examination of different Arab ideologies, be them Arab nationalism, Arab socialism, Arab communism, and Arab Islamism, one common thread is to see the impact, in fact, of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And in fact, before this, the creation of Israel itself, and even before this, the rise of the Zionist project under the umbrella of British mandate. Since then, we have been witnessing this kind of tendency of radicalization within these ideologies, again, be them nationalism, socialism, communism, and Islamism. In every single ideology, they started somehow in a different starting point, and they were caring or at least focusing their attention on different, maybe local, national issues. Then suddenly you have this international foreign intrusion into the region, changing the landscape and even affecting the orientation of these ideologies. And in my, again, analysis, we can draw this a curve of radicalization since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 up until now. Then we have been going through stages of radicalism. One leads to another. I am here not kind of blaming everything on, or using a conspiracy theory on Israel or Israeli politics, so on and so forth, because there have been, of course, sets of national and local conditions and circumstances leading and feeding into the radicalization tendency. But what I am trying to say is we cannot ignore the whole issue of Palestine and the developments of the Arab-Israeli conflict in creating tendencies of radicalization in the region. Now, when it comes to the Palestinian, I'm going to talk about, let's say, the Palestinian sphere of politics, then the Israeli sphere of politics. Within the Palestinian sphere of politics, we have used to have, since, let's say, 1950s, 1960s, different forms of resistance to Israel, the Israeli occupation, the Zionist, if you like, projects coming from secular perspective. And then they failed in achieving anything for the Palestinians, leading into the 70s and 80s, again, extra mile of failure, ended up with another component, another party into the conflict within the Palestinian sphere of politics. That is Hamas and the Islamist movements. So my point here is the failure of moderate secular movements, even within the field of resistance, yielded or opened the way for more, if you like, radical religiously based movements. The same kind of curve could be seen within the Israeli politics, leading in from the 1960s into 1970s, late 1970s. We have the religious right in Israel taking even more ground until they even won elections with Menachem Begin. From that point, early 1970s, until this very moment with Netanyahu, we have a very bold, if you like, move towards the right within the Israeli politics. So my point is, this is happening. This is the natural consequence. This is the natural result of the non-solving of the Palestinian issue. This is a root cause. Unless you handle it head to head, it will continue to breed more radicalism on not only the Palestinian side, but also on the Arab larger side and within even the Israeli politics. Now, what happened from kind of a regional perspective after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the Oslo Agreement 1993, that is, we had this system, that is Oslo Agreement. This meant to address and handle the Palestine issue and come up with an agreed solution. Now, the difficulty with this, which was again very ambitious, very even popular among the Palestinians and among the Israelis, because finally the international community maybe come up with some sort of serious effort, let's say, quote unquote, to handle or address the Palestinian issue. However, unfortunately, the end result with Oslo Agreement is a system that only perpetuates the occupation, maintains the status quo. And we can judge now, objectively speaking, after the passage of time, we have now, 23 years of Oslo Agreement. Within this regime, we ended up with a Palestinian entity called the Palestinian Authority that meant to lead the Palestinians to sovereignty and independent Palestinian state. That was planned after 5 years of the initial signature of the agreement in 1993. So, in theory, the Palestinians should have had their state in 1999. Now, until now, of course, 2017, 2016, this is not on the agenda or nothing even close to it. But on the contrary, we have the Israeli occupation eating up more and more into Palestinian land, not only on the official state policies, but we have another mini state, and I call it the settler state. And the settler state within the Israeli state has been, in fact, the de facto leader of Israeli politics. And this is somehow happening either in tandem with the official Israeli policies or even against them, but taking the lead all the time and pressuring even the moderate Israeli politicians to move more and more into right-wing politics in order, of course, opportunistic politics to gain votes in elections, this and that. Now, Oslo Agreement, in fact, achieved the three goals, mostly strategic Israeli goals. One is to offset any Palestinian resistance officially. That is, this is now the peace process. And we have been witnessing a process without peace, and this is a well-known, even a cliche, over the past 23 years. It's a process, but yielding no peace. This is one thing, so the Palestinians should do no longer any form of resistance. And then the second thing is to relieve Israel from two burdens. One is the burden of the international image of being an occupier using military force. Now, these images have been somehow mitigated, lessened. That is, Israel is in a process of peace with the Palestinians, which is a second strategic gain. A third strategic gain, relieving Israel from the caring and, let's say, doing the business of the people under occupation, that is the Palestinians. So somehow shelving or kind of transferring so many responsibilities to do with the dirty job of the occupation to the Palestinians. They have their own local authority, which has nothing to do with sovereignty, nothing to do with the security, so on and so forth, but only kind of to do with the local affairs. The end result is, after 23 years, is again the perpetuation of the occupation, the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, the full control and dominance of this settler colonial regime over the Palestinians. The end result, of course, is the creation of so many forms of Palestinian reactions, radicalisms, extremism, all these kind of things. These are natural outcomes of the unnatural circumstances of foreign occupation imposed on the Palestinian people. Now, ironically speaking, this has moved even to the Israeli politics, yielding what is called now Judeo-ISIS phenomena, as named by some Israeli journalists. So I think we have to go. It's a must to go back to the main issue, that is, the Palestine issue, and deal with it. Now, we can turn our eyes, of course, and look at different issues, pressing issues, of course. There is no way of kind of belittling them, be them ISIS or other security threats or the economic strains and this and that. However, I think we have to maintain the significance of the Palestinian issue on the top. Otherwise, we are risking and we are putting ourselves on this kind of, if you like, hijacked by this source of continuous strategic threats. That is the Palestinian issues. And we have to be sincere with ourselves and stop all these strategies and tactics of business as usual. Yes, of course, Israel is the upper hand in the conflict. They succeeded in achieving all the strategies through Oslo agreements and others. But this is not the end of the story. You succeed in suppressing a status quo that keeps yielding so many radical and extremist reactions. And I think, again, unless we handle this, there is no way forward. My final point is in short, that is the outcome, the result of these policies of ignorance. That is, the Palestine issue is now brushed aside, put in the shadow compared to other regional and even global issues. The end result is what? Besides the creation of new forms of radicalism, is to have even the rise of global anti-Semitism, as has been indicated by Bernard Harrison, the author of a book that examined the impact of Israeli politics on Jews globally. So it's kind of, again, we are opening gates after gates of radicalization at the Arab-Israeli level, at the Palestinian level, and even at a global level. And thank you.
Dr. Al-Hroub, before you go off, I wanted to assure you that we have listened to you with rapt attention, and we thank you for reminding me and the audience of and reminding the Institute of one of the existing important issues on the table, which has got now crowded with several other issues. But the points you make, nobody is going to dispute that in this hall, because all of us are in agreement on those. I wanted to remind you that I heard in 2013 the outgoing Israeli Defense Minister, Ehud Barak, at the Munich Security Conference, and he made 2 points in his statement there, and that might be instructive. He said that in the Middle East, that whole region is in the midst of a geopolitical earthquake like the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And then he went on to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian issue for much of his speech. And he ended it by saying that the two-state solution of a Palestinian state side by side with an Israeli state is not a, and I'm quoting him because I wrote that down, not a favor to the Palestinians, but in Israel's interest. So if the Oslo agreements of 23 years ago have got frozen, those accords are frozen, and there has been no forward movement, it is the collective failure of statecraft and diplomacy, regionally, internationally, and between the Palestinians and Israelis, and let's hope that the situation resolves itself in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We now have Her Excellency Thuraya Al-Arayed. You have your 7 minutes.
Again, I'm very happy to be talking to you all. I had a full 2-day, very educating, enlightening experience, both with the speakers and the audience that came to talk to me in the breaks. This is the last sentence I wrote a few minutes ago, but I will start with it. Since we are talking about the future, what we see happening in the future is what we actually consciously or subconsciously want to see happen. Some want to see a better future, a happier future, a future that brings people together, and some want to see disasters. Let's hope that the hopeful ones get what they want. I'll try to cut my speech short. In KSA today, due to the economic situation as well as the political situation, we put emphasis on the economic side because it is the basis that builds both individuals and states. We put emphasis on investments, actual investments, inviting investments from outside as well as from inside. We put trust and investment in the people, positive relationships, sharing responsibilities between the citizen and the state, for stability, permanent peace, and sustainable long-term growth among states and within the state itself. This is the most obvious challenge of the future. The program of national transformation that you must have heard about now is our latest attempt. It attests to this. It's a very brave attempt to meet challenges, which are not easy, and to solve not only economic problems, but also regional and inter-state relationships. We need to hold judgment before we pass that judgment on the wisdom of this decision, which is really extending your neck out, for at least 2 years before we can say it is succeeding or failing, both internally or externally. Oil is a very important factor for all of us. I have worked in the oil sector for over 25 years before I joined the Shura when I left. In the long-range planning capacity, we know within the company and within the government that it is a market related to commodities. We have plans to find other sources. It goes up and down. The prices go up and down. Demand and supply change. So it is not wise to depend on one source of income for us or one source of getting it for the others. So now we want to widen the sources of income to include minerals, to include other savings from the expenditures of the government, because we vowed to ourselves that we will not dip into our reserves and we will keep our backs protected. If income goes down, it will have an effect not just for us as the oil producing countries, be it the Gulf countries or Iran or anybody else, but also for the countries that have relationships with us in terms of getting some of their national income from relationships, including sending manpower that we need to help our economy. And I can assure you that our projects are not going to be stopped, because we don't intend to stop growing, but they will probably be delayed, and delays will always affect the manpower. I see our future in a more mature relationship, closer ties, cooperation with Asian countries. Most of the esteemed colleagues that spoke gave me an idea into what areas can be, and my friend Dr. Ebtesam mentioned some of them. What areas are there for more closer relationships? Our immediate regional neighbors that are, that have more influence into the situation are Iran and Turkey and Egypt, and this has been mentioned by, these are not West Asia, they are closer to us in the area. Again, I take seriously what was reiterated by our government, that we extend our hands in peace, and we want cooperation and a mature, sane, dependable relationships. But we don't want to raise our arms against them. We don't want to enter into wars, and we don't expect them to enter into insane conflicts with us, because it hurts everybody in the region. We have had dependence on traditional friends or allies, European, American. In the end, we all discovered that a trustworthy ally doesn't keep changing his relationship with you according to interests. Because if his interests change, our interests also change, and we expect relations that build both sides, rather than is a sticky situation you don't know how to get out of because he changes partners. But having talked about the need for positive relationships and trust, we also need to talk about respect. You have to be dealing with each other as peers and not as submissive side to the other side in the relationship. This has to be set from the beginning. So if we are going to be friends with Egypt or Iran or Turkey or anybody else, it has to be a relationship of equal peers that respect each other. There are some things that actually I heard here that made me feel happy. I was happy to hear the Iranian speaker earlier today, speak about the position of Iran. I'm happy to hear that Iran does not want to be a toy in a foreign policies of rivalries of major powers. That's exactly how we see it too. We need a position where our feet are in the ground, even if our dreams and our aspirations for our countries are in the sky. Saudi-Iran relationship has seen better times at the top level and at the people's level. We differentiate between governments and people, be it Americans. I've lived in America 7 years, and I know some Americans don't even know where the Middle East is. They have nothing against us, but the decisions are made by the government for better or for worse, and by one party or another, one individual or another, one group or another. The same thing with Iran, the same thing with Turkey. We share some history. The French, also the Europeans, we share some happy moments, we share some unhappy moments. The people are not the government, neither us nor they. But if the people are respected by the government, then the decision taken by any government takes into account what the people want. And what does the people want? They want peace. The man in the street wants to live, to have his children grow safely, have a promise of a better future and a chance to better his life. That's all he wants. He doesn't want wars or colonization or the risk of losing whatever little that he has, including his life. Hopefully, this awareness of human rights, of the need to have the little things that God gave everybody equally, given equally to you, to have a chance to live, is what we all should work for. I know that in my country, and I know for seriously, I can assure you, we have come to decide that this is what we want and we all will work for it. Now, at the end, I say the future will be better for most international community, especially the sane people, the sane factor in it. Go back to sectarianism in the Gulf. The divide is not going to stay, and I can assure you of that. People of the Gulf and in the world, from Egypt, the GCC, to Iran, to Iraq, the ones I met here and the ones I know since childhood, realize it now for what it really is, a ploy. It started as a difference in opinion, which was raised to a political rather than religious stance. Today it's just a ploy to weaken us and to keep us fragmented, apart, and easy to manipulate, economically and otherwise. Hopefully, we will all work together that this doesn't happen. We want a world of peace, and if we stick to what we want, we will get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. We did need a positive injection at this stage of our deliberations, and thank you for dwelling on interconnectedness and the people-to-people aspect of relationships and the people-centric aspect of human development. I think that's important. And the message against sectarianism resonates very well in India because we also fear it and we also want to transcend it. Thank you very much. Now we have Professor P.R. Kumaraswamy.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, IDSA, for inviting me. Due to paucity of time, and with the permission of the chair, let me do the unusual. Read what I intended to say. 1 week is too long in the Middle East, and it is difficult, even dangerous, to be an optimist. The choice, therefore, is between the uncertain status quo and an unpredictable nightmare. Within this, one can visualize 5 short to medium-term challenges. 1. Even after 5 years, it is too early to write off the Arab Spring, and the Arab yearning for change has not run its course. While lacking an overarching roadmap, individual Arab countries will have to evolve a model that reflects and suits their social and demographic realities. No country can influence and determine the appropriate model for others. 2. The declining American influence in the region will continue, with no other country or group of countries being in a position to provide an alternative leadership. Some external powers will try to carve out spheres of influence without dominating the entire region. 3. Religious extremism and sectarian tensions are here to stay, and political violence would continue to undermine the stability, territorial integrity, and in some cases, even viability of the state. 4. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is important, but immediate resolution is unlikely because both sides lack wisdom, foresight, and the political will. Moreover, it does not appear to be the core problem facing the region, as Arab and non-Arab countries have far more serious problems to worry about than the statelessness of the Palestinians. 5. Oil prices will continue to be low, and this will affect both big and small energy players. The entry of post-sanction Iran will exert further pressure on the prices. The low oil price will also affect the search for non-hydrocarbon energy alternatives. Within this scenario, what are the areas of cooperation? 1. It is too early for India to get involved in any regional security arrangement, as it would have to answer 2 basic questions: security for whom and against whom. Most regimes feel threatened internally, and any involvement would entail India taking sides between rival factions. 2. In the broader sense, ISIS, religious extremism and indoctrination, terror financing, and cybersecurity will be the prime area of cooperation. In recent years, Israel dominated India's security cooperation. Now, fighting ISIS entails enhanced cooperation with countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Religious extremism poses an existential threat to these countries, and therefore cooperating with them makes good common sense for India. 3. Expatriates and energy components are the strengths of India's engagement with the region. But they are also its weaknesses and prevent India from fully exploiting its potential. The trade figures are misleading, and the economic energy engagement is largely confined to energy imports. During 2014 and 15, for example, energy made up more than 40% of India's total trade with the Gulf region. Indeed, oil imports make up over 90% of India's imports from Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. In the case of Yemen, it is close to 99%. Likewise, India is more than maids, drivers, shopkeepers, and assistants that an ordinary Arab encounters on a daily basis. 4. While non-official collaborations are important, to be meaningful and effective, India's engagements with the region will have to be primarily political. There are no alternatives to G2G engagements, especially in the Middle East, where leaders continue to play the dominant role. 5. Fortunately, India now has an external affairs minister for whom foreign policy is our only priority. Contrary to initial media speculations, she has been handling her portfolio fairly well. Since June 2014, she traveled to 31 countries, including Bahrain, UAE, Oman, Egypt, Palestine, and Israel. What, therefore, is an engagement strategy? Narendra Modi does not want to be a one-term prime minister. His domestic as well as foreign policy agenda is economy. Therefore, the size of the economy or population is less important for him than the size of the country's commitment to India. The UAE is a case in point. Prime Minister Modi would therefore prioritize countries of the region depending upon their contribution to India's economic growth and development. 2. When it comes to Middle East and its problem, India is a disinterested power, not an indifferent one. At the same time, despite temptations, suggestions, and friendly invitations, India would desist from any intervention, involvement, or even mediation in any conflicts and tensions in the region. Over the year, the political engagement with the Middle East has been limited, and it would therefore have to reverse this trend and increase high-level contacts, exchanges, and interactions. It will have to diversify its engagements and add economic content. 3. India will have to recognize the security dilemmas of its interlocutors. For example, Saudi Arabia is an economic power, but in military terms, its security concerns and fears are not different from small states. This is reflected in its approach towards a number of regional developments. Therefore, even when disagreeing with its depiction of Iran and its ambitions in the region, India will have to recognize Saudi concerns vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic. 4. If India is serious about cooperation, then it should use a terminology commonly used by the countries of this region, namely Middle East, not the Indo-centric West Asia. Final thought. Is India a model? Despite the temptations, India should avoid projecting itself as a model for the turbulent Middle East. Democracy and plurality presupposes an innate willingness of not imposing one's views and values upon the other. Just as one is willing to learn from the experiences and wisdom of other individuals and nations, one should also leave it to others to learn and unlearn from the Indian experience. Thank you very much.
So here we had professor from JNU and the secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs in the morning on exactly the same page, that India as a country doesn't preach, doesn't give sermons, and should not. And I think that's a good takeaway. And whether we are a disinterested power in the future and the terms of our engagement, how they are going to shape, that's going to be shaped over a period of time in the remaining 3.5 years of Mr. Modi's premiership. But I don't think disinterest is an option for India. The best way perhaps, and it's imperfect to describe it, is with the challenges of the region, and our own challenges are also pretty formidable. So before we entangle in other challenges, we have to resolve some of our own. But we have a detached empathy in that area. And I have something to say about our vision of the neighborhood, but that will come at the very end of the presentation. So we'll move now.
That is the dangers posed by the ISIS. It has challenged the Sykes-Picot Agreement, captured territories from Iraq and Syria, and established a caliphate. The capture of territories and establishment of caliphate has certainly attracted a large number of people from across the world. At present, it is counted that there are around 30,000 foreign fighters who have joined the ranks of ISIS from over 100 countries. But of the particular concern is the involvement of a large number of women in the ranks of the ISIS. It is not the first time that women have been involved in the ranks of the ISIS, but the scale and magnitude in which the ISIS has attracted women into its rank is something which is much higher than the past. That means ISIS has proven the world two things: that women can be terrorists, and that terrorism doesn't belong to the exclusive domain of the macho. By this, ISIS has challenged the stereotypical portrayal of Muslim women being subservient to family and the community, and the fact that women from many developed countries have chosen to leave the material comfort behind home and join ISIS shows a deliberate and conscious choice on their part, which needs to further scholarly investigation. Moving beyond the ISIS, there are several other non-state actors which are operating at present in the region. And I would say that in West Asia, states today feel more threatened by the non-state actors than the rival states in the region. There are a number of instances of this. ISIS is a bigger threat to Syria and Iraq. Similarly, other countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other countries as well, they feel threatened by the ISIS. There are Houthis, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah, those who are very powerful non-state actors. Thus, there is a continuous attempt by these non-state actors to expand and influence, which, on the other hand, is being faced by the mighty Arab state. By nature, the Arab state is authoritarian, non-democratic, with a strong military and security apparatus. And in the last 5 years, we have seen that Arab states have not hesitated to use force on its own citizens when they have felt that there is a security challenge to their own regimes or to their own nation. So that the tussle between the attempts of the non-state actors to expand and the resilience of the Arab state is going to continue in the near future. There has been a lot of talk on sectarian politics. There is nothing much to add, but I would like to draw your attention to the events that followed after the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr by Saudi Arabia. The activities of both Saudi Arabia and Iran shows a more kind of temptation to escalate. I think both should have adopted a more restrained approach towards the issue. And what we have seen that in the aftermath is that both countries have tried to garner more and more support in their favor. Both countries have been successful in this regard quite a lot. This shows that they have quite a huge influence in the region over other countries, but this certainly doesn't reflect their capability or maturity to be called as regional leaders. Both the countries have lacked something else. Thus, this cool-headed diplomacy is required at present in the region, over a temptation to escalate the conflicts throughout the region. Besides Iran and Saudi Arabia, there are other regional players as well, like UAE and Qatar, who have become animated, being very active in regional politics as well. But if you take a look at the role of the regional players, they are more driven by the desire to protect and promote their national interest than to forge a regional cooperation, taking everyone on board. So there are certain kings, there are certain military rulers, generals, presidents, but statesmanship is something which is conspicuously absent in the region today. What you need is statesmen and visionaries who can think beyond the short-term interest for longer-term peace and stability in the region. West Asia is at the center of world politics now. What is happening in West Asia is certainly affecting all over the world. You can think of developments in Libya, Syria, Iraq, or in the Gulf. They have certainly to a large extent impacted the global politics, and particularly in recent times. It has affected a large number of countries across the continents, including Europe, South Asia, Africa, and all. And there is also a concern about slow withdrawal of US from the region, and we are going to see a new US president in a few months of time, and hope that that will to a certain extent influence the West Asian politics in general. Similarly, the involvement of involvement of Russia in Syria in particular has certainly threatened to change the geopolitics in the region. And finally, I would say that what is needed is a dialogue among the countries of the region and dialogue among the major stakeholders in the region. It looks easy to talk about this and make it happen in practical in the ground, but I would say that there is no alternative to dialogue and diplomacy in the region. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan. I think you ended with the term dialogue, and I see Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad in the front row, and he has been a long advocate that in the region. He's been writing about it for the last several years, that Saudi Arabia, whether it's Daesh or whether it's IS, with what Ban Ki-moon has been uninspiring in his speeches generally, but on one issue he made a very inspired statement. When he was describing the Islamic State in a Security Council discussion, he said, "I reject this word because this has nothing to do with Islam and it is a non-state." So his feeling was that we should call it Daesh. And I have a marked personal preference for it, but the Institute doesn't take a position on it. But now, Dr. Reza Islami.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and also thanks for the second opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate that. I'll speak very briefly about the present situation and also a little bit also on the future trends. And since I'm not a politician, so forgive me to be more transparent, more than what is usual at this kind of events. I think the present situation will go on a bit for some time, because there is no political will on many fronts to resolve this issue. Obviously, to my mind, Israel is happy with the situation, and probably they may do whatever is at their disposal to mess things up more for two obvious reasons. One is that more this situation goes on, the Islamic front and the Muslim world is weakening, so it is at their interest to my mind. And also, more we talk about ISIS, less we talk about Palestinian cause. Since ISIS has been around, we talk much less about Palestinian cause, and also the issue of settlements and the atrocities that Israel is committing toward Palestinians. So obviously they are not happy with resolving this issue or any attempts to resolve this issue. As to the US, I think they are very undecided, and to me, as not an expert, but this is what I gather, they are not decided on this issue and in the region yet. They made two major mistakes twice, quickly, one after another. They helped creation of Al-Qaeda, and they financed Al-Qaeda. They promoted Al-Qaeda when they were fighting against Soviet Union, and afterwards they kept them active, and when the Al-Qaeda turned against them, then the fight began, and now they made the same mistake. They helped created ISIS to combat Syrian regime. Not that I am in favor of Syrian regime, of course. They are dictators being in power for some time, and they massacred people when they protested peacefully. But anyway, when they saw that they created this and they financed with the money generating in the region by Saudis and Qataris. So now when they notice that this is going to be worse than Assad's regime, so they are fighting against Daesh. But this is not the way they should fight against ISIS. To me, they are not. They are undecided. They don't know really what to do. I think they don't have a clear foreign policy, and this might go on until new president takes office. And also one more thing to me, arguing that this situation will go on a little bit more is because the ideas behind ISIS is fed by Wahhabism, and Wahhabism is doing everything they have and the money that they have to spread Salafi views to the issues. They are providing money to Sunnis in certain parts of Iran. They are providing, they are financing certain schools in Pakistan, and Taliban is outcome of those schools, and we all suffer from those activities. And I think as Professor Telmiz Ahmad brilliantly mentioned yesterday, the basic ideas of Salafis, if I am wrong, please correct me, is from Wahhabism. And we didn't talk about this more. This is the basic roots of Salafis and the hatred they generate towards other sects in Islam and also in the region. By the way, I am not ignoring radical Shi'is groups also, but that's the subject for another event. But I'm aware of that. I'm critical of those groups as well. But now we are talking about ISIS. And at the same time, there are other countries in the region that they are happy with the situation because they live and they survive out of turmoil. Peaceful situation, peaceful coexistence, it is not in their favor for obvious reasons. So this is the situation. Because there is no political will, I think whatever is happening will go on a bit. But for the future, this is what I think. I think maybe we can push ISIS back and we can get those territories back they hold. But as mentioned yesterday and today, we cannot kill the idea. The extremism and the radical view is there. So the counter activities should focus on different fronts. First of all, we should not leave it to the governments to resolve this issue. They are not much in favor, as I explained. Everyone is looking for their own interest, economic, religious, political, whatever. I think people should get involved. That's why from yesterday I am promoting this idea that people should get involved. The community-based organizations and the NGOs and the civil society should get involved. First, we should support reform-minded religious readings. We should support Islamic reformism because they provide modern new readings and new understanding of the religion, which is more compatible with modern needs. This is religiously speaking, it's a counter to ISIS ideas and Wahhabism. So I think we should all focus on this, and I invite researchers who are present greatly in these 2 days event, and I noticed that they are more present than those who are supposed to be in this events, and I appreciate their presence. All those PhD students, I talked to some of them in the last 2 days, and researchers in this institute, they should focus on this, how to promote religious reformism, because they can convince Muslim audience. ISIS has an audience because Islamic reformism is weak a bit. But if we strengthen Islamic reformism, which provides coexistence, which provides tolerance and peaceful coexistence, then that's religiously is a counter reading as to ISIS reading. So this one, and second, we should, as I mentioned, this is one front to promote Islamic reformism. Second, we should not wait only for them to achieve to a certain point. We should also work on democratic values and human rights, and to choose human rights as a criteria. Human rights, human dignity, and all the elements and characteristics of human rights, including non-discrimination, equality, tolerance, and peace, should be our main objectives. And this should be the criteria to judge any government's activities. If this event was about human rights, I would be more critical of my own government, but it is not. But as to this issue in this conference, I'm saying that we should focus on human dignity, on equality, on coexistence. And this would not happen if without the civil society's participation. If we leave it to the governments, that won't happen. Since yesterday morning, I'm promoting India's role on this front, but I'm not getting proper response, to be clear and transparent, with all due respect. They are saying that we don't want to export democracy. Yeah, democracy as a system. Why not? Democracy is a system. We should export this system. Human rights is a package. It's an idea. It's not just one idea. It is a system. International human rights law is a system, has its own characteristics. Why not to promote this? Why not to export this? So I'm saying that this is another activity that in the future it should take place. Engaging civil society, engaging citizens to citizen discourse, and to promote democratic values. Without that, these ideas, the roots in Wahhabism, in Salafis, will not go away. So that's what I'm saying, that if we want tolerance, as you witness in India, if we want peaceful coexistence, we should promote democratic value and human rights, as Professor Al-Najjar mentioned also. So I think if we don't leave it, if we leave it to the governments, we won't achieve this. If we want to get rid of ISIS, not only ISIS, any radical extremism. Now we are talking about the extremism in Islam that could happen. Maybe, probably, I'm not an expert, maybe extremism in Hinduism, in other religions. If we want to eliminate these kind of understandings, first we should promote reform-minded understandings and readings of the religious sources, more compatible with modern needs, and secondly, involve people. I would call on IDSA to get involved in more exchange programs. Professors, researchers, students. I invited many of the researchers, I talked to them in the last 2 days, to come to Tehran, to visit our students, to do more activities on academic fronts. This is, I think, this could be one of the solutions that is possible to get rid of these ISIS, and also to move forward to live in a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that contribution. I think more exchanges across different forums is always useful. I don't think, however much you come here and push Indians and Government of India to do something more on democracy promotion, that's not going to fly. But what we believe is that we have neglected this part of our relationship a little bit because of our great advantage in public diplomacy, which is got nothing to do with government effort. The use of the English language, the popularity of Bollywood across the Gulf, West Asia, and different parts of the world, that has made us complacent. And so we really have to invest a little more in public diplomacy, in promoting more exchanges. And I think that was well said, because what we can do certainly is by bringing more people here, show by osmosis and by example how we do things without telling anybody else how they should do what they need to do. One remarkable feature of the India-UAE exchange when Mr. Modi was there was a very curious paragraph, very forcefully expressed, that the two countries decided to exchange religious scholars. I remember several years ago, I was in a difficult place, and I had, the Deoband had then come out with a fatwa against use of violence for political purposes, and there was great excitement, and that was in Kabul, and President Karzai called me the very next morning and said, you know, I want to send the Ulema Council leaders. There was a kind of Politburo of 7-8 members. All of them should go to Deoband. And in my innocence, I shot off a proposal to government for which at that time I got a reprimand. So because we don't want to, generally our attitude is not to get mixed up in other people's problems. But I think there is a change, and there is a change reflected in the India-UAE statement that if religious scholars between India and the Emirates can meet, then surely religious scholars in an organized way can meet across the region, between India and the region, between India and the Gulf states and Iran. So it is a possibility that I think we can explore going forward. Professor Anwar Alam now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity. Well, most of the points have already been covered here, actually. So, but nonetheless, as the last speaker, I would like to reflect 3-4 observations. I do maintain that, contrary to very prevailing opinion here, that the United States is a declining force in the Middle East, somehow I do not subscribe to this. My guess is that this perception has really built in the background of the crisis in Syria, in the background in the crisis in Iraq, in the background of crisis in Afghanistan, where the United States has not been in a position to manage the terrorism as such. And therefore, this expectation that since the United States has not been of late directly involved in managing the Syrian crisis, it does point toward the limitation. But I do believe is that nation do revise its own strategy, the nation do revise its own mechanism, and therefore the United States has realized that any kind of the further direct intervention is probably much more counterproductive than a much more sophisticated and the invisible and probably indirect form of the domination that it will exercise, in fact. And I think that, as Professor Pasa has rightly said, that as far as the military presence of the United States of America in the region is concerned, it is already very much there. I do believe is yes, I mean the Cold War is certainly over, but that does not mean the United States is going to give a complete open field to the Russians in the Middle East, in fact, or in the West Asia. Russia has been historically a peripheral force in the region. It has been confined historically to Syria only, in fact, and that is probably one of the reasons that the long-lasting friendship again and the defense relationship finally brought the Russia back for some reason, in fact. Otherwise, I mean, for example, I mean, the United States will be very happy to see the stabilization of the region with the Iranian hands, actually, and why not? Nuclear deal has been done. In the past, the Saudis have lived with the robust Iranian-American relationship. Saudis today would like to see certainly that Iran should not play a very big role that is in the Saudis' interest. But if it requires, it will develop that capacity to live with that political reality also, in fact. So it is not something that, certainly the American would like to see that more regional power play a greater role in the management of this emerging conflict, in fact. Having said this, my second proposal would be that I don't see a prospect for the political and economic cooperation feasible in the emerging situation in the region, in fact, in the near future. Not because of very pervasive, for example, the conspiracy theory that the Israelis do not allow, US do not allow, or the whole question of the divide and rule, but precisely because of the historic weakness of the state system in the region, in fact. Almost probably barring Turkish and the Iranian, the Arab state system is historically very weak. I mean, the whole tradition of the state making is weak. And therefore, that's precisely explained is that the most of the political and economic decision in this region actually flows from the whole logic of the security of the regime. If there is any discourse over the security, it's the discourse of the security of the regime, in fact. And unless and until you really build that state kind of the institution, that kind of the political trust that actually required for building the cooperation across the region will not be possible, in fact. So that's my submission, in fact. And therefore, you do find that it is because of the security of the region, in fact, you do find is that there is a remarkable leadership rivalry within the region, not today, but also in the past. So Saudi versus the Egyptian, in fact, Saudi versus Iranian, in fact. We have seen coming today, for example, Erdogan is coming, and probably one of the most important, would like to project himself as the leader of the Muslim world. I am living in Turkey over the last 3 years, in fact. But amazingly, what I see is that one corruption issue come in Turkey, and suddenly Erdogan become authoritarian. State does not have a capacity and management capacity to really address to the whole issue of corruption. He will change the entire judiciary. He will talk about the presidential systems. He will pick up, like for example, 100 academics put in jail. He will take over the entire critical media. In fact, overnight, you can see that happening, in fact. And all this happened simply in the background of the one corruption issue. So I really do not understand that you are such a very powerful state and such a very popular figures and such a very national hero, but you do not have a capacity to manage one corruption issue, and you totally become authoritarian, in fact. That actually speaks a remarkable historical fear of this state vis-a-vis its own civil society. And therefore, when it comes to the role of the people and the civil society roles, I actually do not see actually. It is the state that is the most predominant phenomena into the Middle Eastern history, in fact. Society does not have much role to play. I do not see, that's my observation. My third point probably is that the impression which is gaining is that because of the IS or because of this ISIL, and there is likely to be fuel for the fragmentation and the balkanizations in the region, in fact. Yes, there is a strong social force that is gravitating towards both in Syria and the Iraq, but probably there is a consensus within the international community that despite there is a tendency, I do not see that the balkanization and the fragmentation of the region will take place, because that is certainly not only in the interest of the regime, and neither the regional forces of the international community want, in fact. Much negative point has been said about the Iran and the Iranian roles in the regions, but let me make two observations, in fact. Number one observation is that this Islamic Republic of Iran in the existence for the last 30 years. This last 30 years, the Iranians have not produced any representative of what is today is called Jihadi Islam, or has not produced suicide bombers over the last 30 years. Over the last 30 years, the Iranians have not invaded any other neighbors or any other the Gulf countries. Yes, there are two island problems with the UAE and all, but overall, there has never been any direct interference. But Iran has been, the bully of all the time, in fact. In fact, the Iranian itself do not want to like the disintegration of the Iraq or probably disintegration of the Syria, because that is likely to decline its own influence in the region, in fact. So I really do not see any kind of the fragmentization, the balkanizations actually taking place, in fact. The last point which I would like to mention, much has been said about terrorism and ISIL, in fact. I would say that yes, there are multiple internal and external factors, and the time do not permit me to actually go into that. But what I believe is that any development or any ferocity or any capacity of the terrorist groups actually depends on its linkage with the state. And unless and until you delink the relationship between the state and the non-state actor of the terrorist as such, like for example ISIL. ISIL actually flourishes in the background of the Saudis and the Kurds and the Turkish relationships. We know the arms shipments and the trucks loads and this and that have gone. That continue. So even there is a declaration, and there is a unity, and there is a condemnation, and there is Arab League passing the resolutions. As long as the state has its own linkage with the terrorist groups, it will really not be possible to deal with that phenomena. After all, Taliban has really survived precisely because of the support of the IS and the Pakistan, in fact, until date. You know, it is not that it has capacity of its own. So I think that any discussion on terrorism, and instead of focusing only on the radical ideology and all, we really need to focus that in a situation where the terrorism is also emerging as a part of the foreign policy, how this discourse needs to be delegitimized and how we should really dealing the issue. Thank you very much.